Hello everybody, I hope you're well. I want to make it very clear that despite my job of being a professional hater with an analytical edge, when I spend 20 great British pounds to go to the cinema to watch a film with actors that I like, directed and written by someone whose work I've previously really enjoyed, I want to enjoy myself. I want to enjoy myself. And guys, I wanted to like Materialists so badly. I wanted to like Materialists. I like Dakota Johnson and Pedro Pascal. I loved Past Lives. And if you listen to my podcast, Voice Notes with Theresa, where I post weekly, I find the contemporary dating landscape absolutely fascinating. It's probably one of the topics that I repeatedly go back to because I find it so interesting. But Materialists really disappointed me. And I think it's such a shame because the bare bones of the film were so promising. I actually didn't know anything about the matchmaking industry before going into this film. And I don't know anything now. And I really want to know more, especially with the rise of online dating. I'm really curious to know how the rise and almost normalization of dating apps has impacted the matchmaking industry. But I think that's a different video, different podcast episode for a different day. In general, I just have a very vested interest in the commodification of dating, the dating market, the commodification of love. As I said, Materialists really disappointed me. And look, I watch films all the time. Films disappoint me quite often, but it's only in special cases where I'll bring it onto the main channel and make an entire video about it. And it's often when it has a socio-political edge to it. And there is some kind of socio-political conversation that I can link it to. And Materialists really fired up a bit of a discourse storm when it came out. The film was accused of being broke boy propaganda. Income and class status play a huge role in the way that people form romantic relationships. And when it comes to the broke boy propaganda discourse, people tend to fall or seem to fall into two camps on complete opposite ends of the spectrum. Or at least the two loudest opinions tend to be on opposite ends of the spectrum. On one hand, you have women who claim that if you're a high value woman, you must be attained by a high value man who makes above X amount of money, who never even allows you to split the bill, is capable of financially supporting you. And a lot of the time these TikTok accounts will give you advice on like places to frequent to find your high value man. And although this seems extreme, I think with the rise of social media and TikTok, I'm seeing this sentiment a lot more often. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who claim that if you even factor in your potential partner's income or class status, that you are classist. And as someone who discusses both gender imbalances within dating and also class politics on this channel and over on my podcast, this is a topic which requires a lot of nuanced discussion, and naturally it's a topic which I find really interesting. And just before we get into it, I would love to thank Vinted for sponsoring today's video. Yes, you heard that right, Vinted. It's September. I know a lot of people use this month and the change of seasons almost as a fresh start. And maybe a part of that start is by clearing out your space. And the most sustainable way you can clear out your wardrobe is not by throwing your clothes away, but by selling them on Vinted. It's very easy to use and there are no seller fees. You guys probably know this, but Vinted has been my go-to app for buying and selling secondhand clothes for years. With Vinted, the clothing which has been sat in your wardrobe unloved, gathering dust, once sold on the app becomes new again. You're giving your clothing a second life, and I honestly think it's quite beautiful. I've bought a few pieces for the upcoming autumn-winter season, meaning that I need to get rid of some to make room in my wardrobe. Follow my closet at Jordan A. Theresa. I'm selling items from £5 upwards. I'll pop a few on screen now. Please forgive me that they're not try-on clips. Most of these clothes are too small for me, but we've got some really beautiful vintage pieces, secondhand pieces, also pieces from small brands I just don't get enough wear of or they don't fit me anymore. Make sure you click the link in the description to start buying and selling on Vinted today, or even check out what I'm selling on my Vinted closet at Jordan A. Theresa. Thank you so much again, Vinted, for sponsoring today's video. If you've been following me for a while, you know how much of a big deal this is to me. I love Vinted, and let's get into it. I want to start out on a positive note. I want to talk about what I liked about Materialists, because despite on my Instagram story, which you can follow me by the way at Jordan A. Theresa, where I said that Materialist was an absolute snooze fest, there are plenty of things, not plenty, that's a bit much, sorry. I'm like queen of being over dramatic. I'm like queen of like totally overshooting it in my speech. But there were a few things in Materialists that I did enjoy. Firstly, as I mentioned when I introduced this video, I liked the idea of Materialists. You don't like the idea of me, you like being seen with me. You don't like me. Is that from Outer Banks? Harper! I like the idea of Materialists. I liked the bare bones of the plot, the matchmaking industry, the commodification of love and the dating market, how people who seek these services are doing so for love, but that seems to be at odds with the methods they are taking to find a partner, such as, factoring in high weight, income, etc. It was a real shame that I feel like in this film we didn't see the true inner workings of the matchmaking industry, because that's what made the film stand out to me. That's what got my butt in that cinema chair. I think as someone who I'm 26, I was born in 1998, not only had my formative years during the beginnings of the digital era, the beginnings of social media, but I am also someone who's lived the entirety of my dating life in the dating apps era. To be fair, I did meet all of my ex-boyfriends either at school or at a pub, or I met one of my exes on Instagram, but nearly every single date I've gone on this year has been through a dating app. It's been through Hinge. I've never even experienced dating before the inception of dating apps, and I'm sure many of us who are watching have the same experience as me. The more I think about it, and I'm interested to know what you guys think as well, I feel like matchmaking services were the dating apps / websites before dating apps / websites existed. If you think about it, it was a place, it was a database, in fact, where single people who wanted to go on dates would go to seek those dates. But after the inception of online dating, and especially once dating apps went mainstream and became the norm, dating apps are convenient, they're easy to use, they can be free. I just feel like dating apps probably replaced the matchmaking industry, and honestly I'm surprised that the matchmaking industry has been afloat for so long in this dating apps era. But it's really interesting because firstly, the inception of dating apps is not the only thing that has disrupted the matchmaking industry. Leanne gathered some very interesting research on the topic, and obviously all the sources will be linked down below as usual. After both world wars, there was a rise of marriage bureaus and personal ads, but also there was the sexual revolution and women gaining more economic and social independence from men. There was also the normalization of casual dating, and as I just mentioned, the inception of online dating led more people who would have previously considered using matchmaking services to meet other single people will now instead resort to dating websites or dating apps. In essence, matchmaking became very niche and only served very small groups of people who either could not make online dating work for them, or what I can imagine was more common were people in elite circles who only wanted to date other people within their elite circles / sort of the upper echelons of society. But as many of us know here, dating apps have been experiencing user decline for years now. Many people are experiencing dating app fatigue. I've already made many videos, many podcast episodes about this, which I will leave linked all down below if you want to know more. But a lot of people are experiencing dating app fatigue. I especially think people, especially women who want a serious relationship, are experiencing a lot of dating app fatigue. I've been using dating apps for X amount of years. I've been on X amount of dates. How have I not met someone yet? People are getting sick of it and people are deleting the apps. And because of this, the matchmaking industry is actually experiencing a little bit of a resurgence. But the services do differ now to what used to be offered in the 20th century. Now, I couldn't find a ton of resources on this, unfortunately, but what I can imagine is, pre-online dating, pre-sexual revolution, especially pre-world wars, I can imagine that the matchmaking industry and matchmaking services probably resembled that of arranged marriages, which makes sense because what we now know as matchmaking is in fact an ancient practice. Oh, hello. Which can be traced back to biblical stories and ancient Greek, Indian, Chinese, and Jewish cultures and communities. But the contemporary matchmaking services of today place a particular emphasis on quality, intentionality, and true connection. Especially when you remember how they currently stand. Matchmaking services have very much now become a response to online dating and dating apps and algorithmic matchmaking. It makes a lot of sense that matchmaking services invest, focus on, and nurture the human side of their services. You aren't relying on a dating app algorithm to spit out someone that you might be compatible with. Instead, when you are hiring a matchmaker, this person has met you, knows what you're looking for, and they are doing that for you instead of you essentially relying on a computer. And something I found really interesting when me and Leanne were digging through some research about matchmaking is contemporary matchmaking services do tend to mirror contemporary dating sentiment and advice. And what I mean by that is if you're single and you complain about being single, or you express any kind of anxieties about being single, or complain about the state of the like modern dating landscape, the first thing that you will hear from people is you need to work on yourself. And you know what? It is kind of true. It's actually very true. I can understand why it's frustrating though, because I see a lot of people on TikTok say, I have done the work on myself. Why haven't I met someone yet? I understand that frustration, but also a lot of the time when people are saying you need to work on yourself, it is coming from a good place. It's a very well-intentioned piece of advice, and it is a good piece of advice. But yes, the first thing that people will say is you need to work on yourself. You need to find happiness within yourself. You need to enjoy your own company. You need to learn to enjoy being single. And this is something that I do agree with. You need to learn to be alone before you meet someone again. I think everybody, sorry, we're going off script here, but I think everybody needs to experience being truly single at least once in their lives and truly independent. Contemporary matchmakers almost fill the place of a life coach, or almost take life coach traits. The matchmaking process often starts with a rigorous personal assessment to ensure that the client is mentally and emotionally ready to date seriously. Obviously, the matchmakers do their thing. They do the matchmaking, factoring in both clients' criteria, shared interests, how they handle their emotions. I'm sure some matchmaking services factor in probably love languages and attachment styles, but I'm not sure if that's like hokey pokey stuff. I'm not sure how much they factor in pop psychology. And your matchmaker supports you through all of this. And your matchmaker often emphasizes the importance of making sure you've worked on yourself first before bringing them into their services. And although this all sounds lovely, and I'm sure it is, we do need to remember that matchmakers are providing a service. They're being paid. And one of the most vocal critiques of dating apps is the fact that the algorithm and app usage is intentionally limited when you don't pay for it. And when you do pay for a dating app, you may have features like unlimited likes, access to more filters. The algorithm actually presents your profile to more people when you pay for dating apps. I mean, it all feels a bit icky, doesn't it? It all feels a bit, I actually wrote in my script, it all feels a bit heinous. And maybe, you know what, maybe I'm being dramatic, but maybe past me had a point, because it feels especially heinous when you factor in the emotionally manipulative language that these dating apps use to get people to pay for their premium services. Like on Hinge, if you don't have any likes or matches, it literally says, no likes, no matches, we're here to help. They place themselves in this role of helping you when really they're just trying to wring a little bit of cash out of you. Both dating apps and matchmaking services are commodifying the dating experience, commodifying love, and taking advantage of people's desperations and people's deepest vulnerabilities and fears of being alone for the rest of their lives and not meeting the love of their life. And they take advantage of it all for profit. And it's interesting that despite one of the film's focal points being about money and class within relationships, within romantic relationships, there isn't that much time nor conversation lent to the fact that these industries are inherently a bit predatory. They prey on people's deepest insecurities and vulnerabilities. As a matchmaker, I can imagine you want the best for your clients, and I can imagine that people go into that industry very well-intentioned and are very well-intentioned, but it doesn't take away from the fact that you're profiting off of people's greatest fears. But the fact that I liked the bare bones of Materialists and I liked the idea of Materialists, already my first frustration with the film comes in. And that's that it didn't go anywhere with it. There was so much potential. We were rooting for you. We were all rooting for you. We're going to circle back to this later. Let's keep these good vibes going. I thought that Materialists was a really refreshing approach and take, or at least the intention behind it was refreshing approach to a romance film, and also the love triangle archetype. I liked that there was no clear villain in a love triangle. I always find love triangles with clear villain love triangles with clear villains, boring. But romance films never talk about money. And it's actually really interesting that romance films never talk about money, because often so many romance films go beyond romantic fantasy and start veering into financial and class fantasy. If we just think about another, I guess you would call it a romance film that Dakota Johnson has starred in, 50 Shades of Grey, I see so many people, sorry, that was a bit Australian, I see so many people discuss how if Christian Grey was just a regular middle class guy or a working class guy, that film would be terrifying. It wouldn't be anywhere near as romantic. It wouldn't be anywhere near as sexy if Christian Grey was a regular guy instead of a millionaire. And perhaps our gravitation towards these like class fantasy romance films is a recession indicator. Maybe we dream of being swept off our feet romantically by the love of our lives just as equally as we dream of being swept up off our feet by our future super rich partner, and we never have to worry about paying rent or buying really expensive things from the shops like butter or cheese again. I especially think that we dream of this and we fantasize of this when financial constraints do impact our dating lives so much. So many people are forced to withdraw from essentially the dating game, right? Because they simply can't afford to go on dates, or they live at home and they can't bring anyone back. There's a reason why the cost of living crisis is nicknamed the cost of shagging crisis, because the girlies are shagging in their cars again. But getting back on track, I thought that the intention behind Materialists was a very refreshing approach and take on a romance film, but just with a very disappointing execution. And I think because of this like very refreshing sort of new take and approach, what I also liked about the film is the fact that this is a conversation starter. It created conversation, it created discourse. It was a little bit of a cultural moment, and I will always put my hands up when when a film is able to capture people's attention and get people talking, and especially get people talking about deep things like class. I like that it was a film that made you think. I like that it was a film that started conversation. I also really like the cinematography of this film. It's a really beautiful film. It's a total feast for the eyes. The cinematographer Shabir Kirchner also worked on Past Lives with Celine Song. Materialist was shot on 35mm film. There was a lot of use of wide shots, which not only created this feel of intimacy between the characters, but it made the setting New York City. Sorry, I'm not sure whether I've ever shared this because I've posted like New York Instagram dumps on my Instagram, but I love New York. New York is I'm not saying maybe, New York is one of my favorite places in the world. But what I liked about the cinematography is because the use of these wide shots, it made the film where it was set, New York, feel like its own character. And I'm a city girl, and one thing I love about watching a film, a TV show, is when you can tell that it's a love letter to the city that it's set in. So if we just use New York as an example, Broad City, Sex and the City, even Girls, I think are love letters to New York, but especially the first two. And again, I feel like Materialist didn't go all the way with the New York setting where I really feel like it could have. I feel like the only aspect of Materialist that made New York seem like its own character was the cinematography. And it stops there, which is a shame because of the differing class perspectives between Harry, Lucy and John. We could have definitely seen New York from all of their different perspectives, why they love it, and most importantly, why they choose to stay. Because New York, like many expensive cities in the world, if you're there, you're usually there because you really, really want to be there. And if you're struggling in that city and you've moved there, you are staying there and you're fighting to be there because you love it so much. Again, it was another aspect of the film which fell flat, but the film looked really good though. And if you do want a romance film, especially a rom-com, which Materialist was not, but we're going to get to that in a second. If you do want to watch a romance film, a rom-com where the city is a character in of itself, I've recommended this film on my channel before, but watch Rye Lane. Watch Rye Lane. It's set in South London. It's so clearly a love letter to South London. As someone who, I don't even live in South, I'm a North London babe, but there was something about watching that film that just made me feel so warm inside. And there's something about watching a film where you've been to so many of the places in the film that you're like, oh my God. But anyways, highly recommend Rye Lane. Back to Materialist though, I did like the score. Score wasn't as good as Past Lives, but I did like the score Anyways, and we are going to discuss the characters and the cast in just a moment, but a performance I did really like was Zoe Winter's performance. She was also in Succession, and you guys know me, I'm a Succession stan. The subplot in of itself is, again, a conversation for later in this video. Oh, also, I forgot to say, spoiler warning. Spoiler alert, if you don't want spoilers for Materialists, probably don't watch this video. Another part of the film that I liked, and I feel like there's going to be like maybe a bit of a controversial take when it comes to Materialists, but I liked the leg lengthening surgery plot, okay? I liked it. I feel like I'm going to see everyone going, boo, boo. I liked it. Just to jog your memory, it's revealed towards the conclusion that Harry, thought of as a dating unicorn, handsome, successful, tall, nice, is revealed to have spent upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars on leg lengthening surgery to go from 5'6" to 6 foot. Some people found this plot line to be a little absurd. I don't think that this plot is that withdrawn from reality, especially when you consider how wealthy Harry and his family are. The global limb lengthening industry is predicted to grow to be worth over $6 billion by 2030, and it may not be the most popular surgery in the world because of the very high costs. Costs can range anything from £24,000 to £240,000, which, by the way, that range makes me nervous, and it makes me nervous because, like, I'm sorry, but if I wanted to get the limb lengthening surgery and I knew that the range was between 24 bags to £240,000, are you joking if you think I'm going to lengthen my limbs for 24 grand if that's on the lower end of things? What are they putting in there? Straws? I'm scared. But anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Not just that, also the high cost, but there are so many health risks and it's a really brutal recovery period. But this procedure is still popular enough for there to be multiple entire clinics dedicated to leg lengthening surgery. And by the way, the brutality of the procedure goes far beyond just the recovery. And I'm not, sorry, it literally makes me cringe. I am not gonna talk about like what actually happens in limb lengthening surgery. You can Google it if you want to know. It's really gruesome, and honestly, like guys, look at my posture. Like, I literally have shivers up. Like, sorry, it really, I'm a bit squeamish, and it really. So Google it if you want to know. But the brutality of the recovery, or rather the downsides, it goes far beyond just the fact that the recovery is extremely painful. But when you get leg lengthening surgery, you have to learn to walk again. If, let's say, you've gained 4 extra inches, do you know what being 4 extra inches taller just on your legs, how that impacts your center of gravity when you have learned to walk, run, jump, do all of that for the past, let's say you get it when you're 30 years at essentially the same height, or maybe 15 years when you stop growing. You have to learn to walk again. It completely throws your center of gravity off, and you probably won't be able to play sports again, I can imagine, or at least play sports to the same ability. And I know a lot of us are going to be listening to this or watching this video thinking, who in their right mind would do this to themselves? And I know as women, we have been at the mercy of ever-changing, bar-raising beauty standards for as long as we can remember. So, at least in my experience, I do have a little bit of a bad habit of kind of shrugging off male beauty standards, or the ways that men can be impacted by the beauty industry and ever-changing beauty standards. And I can sort of be a bit dismissive of men who are insecure about their height. And I'm trying to change that. But just because as women, we've been living with the social effects of unattainable beauty standards for decades and even centuries, doesn't make men who struggle with insecurities about their height any less valid in their emotions. And I felt that Materialists did handle this topic in a fairly nuanced way. I like that it all related back to the commodification of love. This idea of getting expensive cosmetic procedures like leg lengthening surgery or a nose job or breast augmentation as being thought of as an investment rather than a frivolous and shallow way to spend your money, because improving your appearance may increase your chances in the dating sphere, or even you may receive increased respect from your peers. You might have an easier time finding love and therefore finding happiness. It's interesting. I actually really appreciated this take of surgical procedures, cosmetic procedures being seen as an investment in yourself and an investment in your happiness, an investment in your love life, an investment in your your career, etc. Obviously, the leg lengthening subplot was a little niche, don't get me wrong, but I still like that this moment addressed a very widely felt insecurity amongst men. It made me consider a perspective which I usually don't, researching about leg lengthening surgery and the brutality of just the recovery alone. And I would like to say, sorry, how many things am I going to sneak this into? I feel like I even have a newer, like fresher perspective on this because I literally got out of the hospital last week, so I had my appendix out, and even just getting that very small keyhole surgery on my appendix was like so brutal, like, and it was so tough on my mental health being in hospital and being not very well, like being physically not very well, that when you consider how brutal leg lengthening surgery is, it really makes you consider how insecure people who seek leg lengthening surgery must be, like how far they're willing to go. But on the other hand, I think that like height debates and height discourse can be a really hot topic within the dating sphere, because I feel like it's often boiled down to like these blanket statements, essentially, which boil down to accusations of women who care about height being shallow. But I also do think it's very important to consider that women's preferences to date a man taller than them are rooted in misogynistic beauty standards, which are set up by who? Men. And who set that system up? Not saying that women don't uphold it, because they very much do. I've spoken about this many times on my channel before. Like, why am I getting ads on my TikTok about strawberry legs? Get a grip, girls, come on. But also, like, who set that system up? As a woman, not only is there a pressure to be physically thin and petite, but there's also a pressure to be as small and as unheard as possible. We're socialized to not be loud, to not be opinionated, to not make a fuss, to accommodate to the people around us, especially the men around us, and put their needs above our own. It's no surprise that this pressure to be emotionally small leaks into the physical. I especially think when you consider, at least my experience as a woman, I don't even want to say when I like wasn't pretty, because I was literally a child. When, you know, the boys around me didn't think I was attractive, the way that I was treated then versus not even necessarily now, because I don't surround myself with men like that, but when I sort of like prettied up, the stark difference in the way that men treated me was honestly like anything, like nothing I'd ever experienced in my life. That it's no wonder that women put themselves under so much pressure to attain a certain standard of beauty, because it literally impacts the way that they are treated in their lives, in their everyday lives, and they just want to make their lives easier. But I also think we need to consider messaging and socialization around masculinity and femininity. Men are socialized mostly by their fathers. I'm sure mothers do contribute to this as well. Men are socialized to be dominant and strong and large. Men are socialized to take up space, to walk into a room and own that room. So just because a lot of women want to date a man that's taller than them, we can't put the blame solely on women, because it's the way that both men and women are socialized. We can't put sole blame on individuals for their dating preferences, and especially when these preferences are a byproduct of decades and centuries of gendered socialization. Now, let's finally get into what I didn't like about Materialists and what disappointed me, because there's so many things that disappointed me about this film that I've split it up into a few segments for everyone. Now, before we get into my thoughts about the casting and the characters, above everything, what I didn't like about this film was the fact that it was really boring. It was so boring. And again, as I mentioned previously, I love the bare bones of this film. I love the potential. I love the idea of this film. The commodification of love, gender dynamics within dating, finance and class within dating and romance, the class politics of finding the love of your life. Like, how interesting is that? Yet this film fell so flat. And again, we're going to get into this, but I genuinely thought when I was sat in this cinema, I was like, is this my poor attention span? Is this my poor attention span? So I decided to, because I've watched Past Lives before, so I was like, let me rewatch and jog my memory and see what I think. And I love Past Lives. I absolutely adore and love that film. And I think that Past Lives, although the plot is very different from Materialists, I think that because it's the same writer and director, it has a similar style, a similar pace, a similar tempo. And I think it touches on some pretty hefty subject matters like identity when you immigrate, the idea of paths not chosen, but handles them with such subtlety. And look, guys, I was very much paying attention to that film, so we can't blame my attention span for this one. Just the the way that, I love Past Lives because it was the subtlety in which these very heavy, hefty topics were handled, but in a way that like worms its way into your brain and just stays with you. Like Past Lives is a film that stays with you. It wiggles its way into your brain, into your heart. If you're going to if we're going to take one thing from watching this film, it's to watch Past Lives. Watching this film, watching this video. So I'm not against this style of filmmaking. Materialists was just pretty boring. I don't think much was being said in the film other than like, don't be shallow. Don't be shallow, kiss. I also think that this film doesn't consider the complexities of choosing your partner, choosing your, future partner, potentially the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with. The sort of mindset behind wanting to choose someone who would be able to financially support you if the worst was to happen. But again, we're going to dive more into this and discuss more of this when we start discussing like the broke boy propaganda of it all. I've seen a lot of people arguing that Materialists was a victim of incorrect marketing, that it was incorrectly marketed by A24, that it was marketed as a rom-com when it should have been marketed as, a romance film, maybe even a romance drama comedy. I will say Materialist is very much a mix of romance, comedy, drama. But unfortunately, because it is and to be fair, films that are this mix can be done well, but I think because it didn't fully commit to any which genre, it just fell very flat. It certainly wasn't a rom-com. I'll tell you that for free. There was no rom nor com present. And I know some people are going to argue that this is just part of the new era of rom-coms, that rom-coms can be highbrow. And I agree, rom-coms can be highbrow. Rom-coms don't have to be... I actually think the demonization of rom-coms is rooted in misogyny. Rom-coms can be highbrow. I agree. I see Rye Lane as a highbrow rom-com. I see Rye Lane as a serious, filmy rom-com, if that makes sense. But a lot of people argue that this is just a part of the new era of rom-coms, that the comedy is more subtle. There's, more focus on the artistry. This is making the rom-com a little more serious. This is so the rom-com can be taken more seriously, even though I think rom-coms should always be taken seriously. When Harry Met Sally is one of the best films, and 10 Things I Hate About You and Rye Lane are some of the best films ever. And I understand the sentiment of this argument. I really do. In my head, even though it's a series, I do view Girls as a rom-com. So I know that rom-coms don't need to be so obviously rom-coms, if that makes sense. And also I'm British, so I understand that not all comedies need to be that in-your-face style of American comedy over in the UK, over across the pond. Our sort of sense of humor is very dry and sarcastic. So I'm not against that either. It wasn't even unfunny. It just wasn't super funny. I would have been able to forgive it if it was hitting all of the right romantic notes, but it wasn't doing that either. And I think what really stands out is the lack of romance in this film, especially when, again, I know you shouldn't be... Does Celine Song probably hate that people compare this film to Past Lives? Sure. But if we just compare to Past Lives, I think Past Lives is such a deeply romantic film. Funnily enough, my favorite portrayal of romance in that film is between Nora and her husband. You see the intimacy and the romance in their relationship in such a sort of subtle, normal, everyday way. But anyway, sorry, the lack of romance in this film, whether you can chalk it up to bad casting or a poor script, I'm sure that's up for debate. It could probably be chalked up to both, to be honest. I do think both probably hold equal weight, equal responsibility. But let's actually finally talk about the casting. So we have Dakota Johnson, who is our matchmaking protagonist Lucy, Pedro Pascal as our unicorn Harry, and Chris Evans as Lucy's ex-boyfriend John, who hasn't seemed to make much progress in his dream career and is living the same life he did in his early 20s, now in his mid-30s. Harry and John are, clearly representative of your head and your heart, what you think you want versus who you actually want. I don't know whether this is stupid criticism, and please, girlies, call me out if you think I'm being stupid, but even their names just weren't giving. Lucy, John, Harry. They were just so forgettable, which I think was unfortunately a sign of times to come, or things to come rather. Now, I know a lot of people criticize Dakota Johnson's performances in general for being a bit quote unquote samey. She plays sort of the same character in a lot of her work. And you know what? Guys, I have a confession to make. I don't mind when actors do that as long as they do that well, a la Rachel Sennett. Do you know what I mean? My issue with Dakota Johnson's character in Materialists is that she's not a real character. She doesn't feel like a real person. There were a lot of aspects of her character that I liked, that I warmed to. You know, I liked the fact that she was quite cynical about dating. It was quite clear that working in her industry had hardened her to a certain extent. But firstly, she didn't talk like a real person. And I think that's something that already, if someone's not talking like a real person, if they're talking in riddles, if they're talking like Effie Stoneham, then I'm not buying it. And to be fair, she didn't talk like Effie Stoneham, but you know what I mean. If we draw a comparison to her character to, I don't know why I'm talking about girls so much in this video, but enjoy. If we compare the character of Lucy to the character of Jessa from Girls, it's pretty common sentiment amongst fans of the show that Jessa isn't a real person. Like, nobody knows a Jessa. When there's like debates within the Girls fandom of like what character they think they are, and people say that they think they're a Jessa, it's like, she's definitely not a Jessa, she's a Marnie. The one that I get told I'm the most like is Shoshana, but the one that I actually think that I am the most like is Hannah. But anyway, sorry, circling back, nobody knows a Jessa. Jessa isn't a real character yet. What made her character feel real was, despite this effortless front she put on, she was far from a perfect person. We saw all of her flaws and all of the ways she could be a horrible friend, front and center. We saw her vulnerabilities, and I feel like we never saw that from Lucy in Materialists. The only vulnerabilities you did see with Lucy was when she discovered one of her clients was assaulted on a date, which again, we're going to get onto this plot line in a moment. You see her spiraling and blaming herself. I don't know whether it was the writing, I don't know whether it was the fact that I really didn't like this subplot, that at this point I was like not invested at all, but it just didn't do it for me. If we stay on this topic of realism, I think the reason why realism is taking such precedent when I'm reviewing this film is because Materialists is a romance film that addresses finance, income, and class. It's rooting itself as a romance film which is addressing a topic which is very stigmatized and very taboo. It's addressing something which governs our lives so deeply, so all-encompassing, yet is ignored by most TV shows and films in favor of class fantasy. I feel like this is a romance film which is meant to be rooted in reality. I actually watched the Financial Diets review of Materialists, which I will leave link down below. I didn't agree with everything they said, but I actually really enjoyed the review anyway, so you guys should go check it out. But there were also a lot of things I did agree with the Financial Diets review. One of those things being that Harrys don't exist in the real world. Harrys, who have built mass amounts of wealth within private equity, grew up around mass amounts of wealth, have definitely done some questionable things to get there and to maintain that class status and that wealth. They probably aren't great people. They probably aren't great people. And although this film does try to address this with the leg lengthening surgery, and like maybe he's such a nice guy because he went through the world 5'6" and now he's 6 foot. If he was always 6 foot, then maybe he'd, you know, not be as nice. My sort of rebuttal to that is I know plenty of short men who are absolute assholes. So what now? Pedro Pascal's performance was fine. It was fine. I liked his monologue. I liked that he almost had this front on until the monologue. Seeing him sort of let down his walls, let his guard down, I really enjoyed that aspect of his performance. I know there was a lot of controversy surrounding Chris Evans' casting. A lot of people were saying that he's too classically handsome, or because we see him as this perfect American man, seeing him sort of playing this failing working class actor didn't quite fit. And maybe it's because he didn't disappear into the role enough, because Chris Evans is obviously very recognizable as Captain America. But I don't necessarily think it was that, to be fair. I'm not sure whether I actually even agree with these criticisms. I do agree that it was miscast, but I'm not sure if I agree on the criticisms that he was too good looking, because I'm not being funny, there are plenty classically good looking white men who are still failing working class actors. Yes, being white and being classically good looking and being a man can make succeeding in the acting industry, well actually succeeding in any industry, it can make it a lot more possible. There are going to be less barriers for entry. But of course, we need to factor in people's class background and how that plays a huge role entering any industry, especially the acting industry. Again, it doesn't factor in that there are many good-looking, classically good-looking, working class, white failing actors. This doesn't actually take away from the point that I do also agree that this part was miscast. I think the entire film was miscast. Was it? No, I think this part especially was miscast, and then I think the rest is maybe issues with the script. I think the real outlier here is I think that Chris Evans really lacked charm in this role. I think this kind of role where clearly there's a lot of history between him and Dakota Johnson's character, it requires charm. There needs to be charm, there needs to be charisma, and I just don't think Chris Evans really had that. Or does he have... No, I don't think he has a lot of charisma. You know he does have a lot of charisma. Sorry. I love that interview with Anthony Mackie where he's like, that is a man with fucking charisma and charm. But also something that the Financial Diet mentioned in their review, which is definitely worth mentioning, is we had another bit of classic Hollywood ageist casting. Both Dakota Johnson and Chris Evans are supposed to be playing characters in their mid-30s. Dakota Johnson is 35, meanwhile Chris Evans is 44. When it comes to maybe an alternative, maybe more age-appropriate casting, he is a few years younger than Dakota Johnson, and I'm not, maybe I'm just charmed by him because I think he's so fit. But did someone say Drew Starkey? And it's the thing, I know some people are going to be like, he's too young. No, he's not. Him and Dakota Johnson are 4 years different in age, and they look the same age. Because he skews a little younger, because he is 31, I feel like he could bring in almost this like dreamer quality, almost this like slight naivety into the role, and the fact that like he's carrying on at this, he's hacking away at this acting thing, because he really thinks that he is going to make it, even though he is exhausted of it. Like, I'm not being funny, but the character of... what's his name again? John. He's been trying to make it as an actor in New York for 15 years. I understand being worn down, but also there needs to be this aspect of like optimistic naivety, which I think the role completely lacked. I feel like if there was a bit of a boy-like charm, maybe it would have worked a bit more. As the audience, we would have found it a bit more endearing and a bit more likable. I've also seen a few people follow Dev Patel. He is someone who he has charisma, he has charm. The fact that he hasn't been in a rom-com yet is absolutely criminal. Chris Evans, he just doesn't have charisma. He doesn't have charm, at least in this role. And it didn't fall completely flat, but I just didn't think that it was enough. And again, as I said throughout this video, I was so bored. And I think we especially need to believe as an audience in this deep emotional connection which Lucy and John have, and this like deep emotional history, which, I mean, for lack of a better term, it just wasn't given that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, something I did like about this film was the fact that there was no clear villain. My pet peeve of watching any romance film is when one of the options is so clearly the villain and not the right one. Like, as I mentioned, boring! It's not reflective of real life. And again, sorry, not to make this about past lives, but to make this about past lives, I think something which so many people, myself included, enjoyed about the film was the fact that Nora's husband was not only not a clear villain and not a villain at all, but was actually really likable. He was a really nice guy, and as Hae Sung says in the film, he didn't realize that liking her husband would be this hard. Like, but unfortunately, oh god, the casting just wasn't good, and it just wasn't enough. And I think the characters fell very flat. I think in turn there was just such a lack of chemistry between all of them. And it's the things, I think that like with films like this where there's a love triangle, I think something which helps is having different kinds of chemistry. So it could be that Lucy and John have this like deep romantic emotional chemistry, meanwhile, Lucy and Harry have more of a sexual chemistry. But it was neither here nor there. I feel like there wasn't nearly enough relationship exposition or flashbacks between Lucy and John to ever be rooting for them. And to be honest, when I was watching this film, I wasn't rooting for anyone. What I was rooting for was myself getting the hell out of that cinema and getting into bed because I was so tired and bored. And this is the thing, because of the lack of chemistry between all of them, the person you end up rooting for is probably the person who you think is going to give Lucy, quote unquote, the best life, which is Harry. And I feel like that's almost the opposite effect of what Celine Song is going for in this film. Sorry, it's getting a bit dark, by the way. I hope you guys don't mind. So when I was watching this film and I was finding it really boring, at this point in the cinema, I thought, I'm not going to make a video about this. Like, there really isn't enough to talk about. And then came the assault subplot, and honestly I'm actually kind of surprised that I haven't seen more people discussing this or talking about this, and I would love to know you guys' opinions, because I don't know whether I'm just being a bit sensitive, so I'd really appreciate you guys' thoughts on this. But around halfway into Materialists, Lucy sets up one of her longtime clients, Sophie, on another date. Sophie is one of Lucy's clients who she's really struggling to find someone to couple up with. She can't seem to find someone who wants to go on a second date with her, so Lucy sets Sophie up on a date with Mark, and Sophie is clearly compromising on qualities that she asked for in a partner. She's compromising on height and salary, but she goes on the date anyway from some convincing from Lucy. Lucy's struggling to get through to Sophie the next day, and her boss reveals that Sophie is suing the matchmaking company after she was assaulted on her date. And when Lucy tracks down Sophie to personally apologize, Sophie compares Lucy to a pimp and says she essentially fobbed off her problem client to a bottom of the barrel man, a dangerous man, and Lucy's response was that Mark ticked some of her boxes. And what I took from this scene was that I feel like the implication was that Lucy was so focused on box checking and so focused on like getting as many of her clients matched up and partnered up as possible that she let a dangerous man slip through the cracks. And one of her clients, Sophie, was harmed in the process. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I was really impressed by Zoe Winter's performance in this subplot, especially with what she was given. The only sort of mentions I've seen of this is how jarring the tone switch was to go from sort of light haha to like sexual assault. It was like, whoa. And I especially think when you compare this plot to how the film was marketed, which was as a rom-com, again, it was like a very jarring tone switch. But I do think that if you are going to write about assault within your film, story, TV show, etc., it needs to be handled with the utmost sensitivity, gravity, importance, and unfortunately, and I don't think this was the intention, but unfortunately I don't think that this was the case. Overall, and again, I don't think this was Celine Song's intention. I think overall the messaging of this film was very murky and unclear. So in turn, the messaging behind this subplot was also murky and unclear. If the intention was, as I just said, to show that through the box checking and analytics and numbers focus of the matchmaking industry and the shallowness of dating culture led a dangerous man to slip through the cracks, yes, I am sure that an industry like matchmaking can be very prone to dangerous men preying on these women, again, like this quote unquote slipping through the cracks. But I completely disagree with the notion that if Lucy was less focused on box checking and if she got to know him as a person, that she would have been able to spot that he was a dangerous individual. Unless you've been in an intimate relationship with a person, and even then that's not definite, you do not know if someone is capable of sexual assault or not. Someone can be the most charismatic person in the room and still be a predator. You can sit down with someone and think they're really genuine and kind, and they could still be capable of assault. I thought this subplot placed a lot of the blame on Lucy rather than on the man who committed the assault, and I thought the messaging was so clunky. The implication that the shallowness of dating culture can lead to women being assaulted, I really thought that it was creeping into victim blaming territory, and it made me feel like really uncomfortable. Now, I know that this sort of part of the discourse is what a lot of you guys are really interested in and have been waiting for, and it is the broke boy propaganda of it all. Materialists ends with Lucy choosing John over Harry. The film closes with Lucy being offered this high-paying job within her previous matchmaking company, and essentially it sort of sets up that like Lucy is going to be the breadwinner in that relationship and they're really happy, etc. And you know what? Sorry, a quick side note. I know I've said a lot about the wasted potential of this film, but there was so much wasted potential in this film. Let me put a light on. Sorry, it's getting a bit pink in here. It's actually truly such a shame how much wasted potential this film had, because being as this was a rare romance film that addressed finances and money and class, it's such a shame that this film didn't address the difficulties that many women who make good money, who are successful in their careers, have with dating. How easily a woman's success can hinder her dating life because men feel emasculated by women who make more money than them and are more successful than them. But yes, sorry, back onto the topic at hand. The discourse which was spawned from this film, the broke boy propaganda, these debates and discourses, it seemed to fall into two camps. People labeling Materialists as broke boy propaganda and other people rebuttaling this, accusing these people of being classist. Even Celine Song had a response to the broke boy propaganda allegations. I find it very cruel to talk about John as a character who loves Lucy and to talk about him in such cruel terms as broke boy or broke man. I think that there is something about that, the classism of that, the kind of like hatred of poverty, hatred of poor people. I think that it is a very troubling result of the way that wealthy people have gotten to our hearts. To think about my movie in such classist terms, even the whole movie is about fighting the way that capitalism is trying to colonize our hearts and colonize love. I think it's really interesting, and I actually really like the way that Celine Song articulated herself like in this response. You could tell that she writes films for a living, do you know what I mean? Like how wealthy people have gotten to our hearts, the colonization of love. That doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with everything she's saying, because I think it's more nuanced than classism, not classism. Look, I'm not going to sit here and claim that phrases like broke boy propaganda aren't rooted in classism, and I'm sure that there are plenty of people who didn't like the ending that it is rooted in a level of classism, and that they're sort of perpetuating, repeating classist rhetoric when they're talking about how they didn't like the ending. But I also think that just because a large bulk of the audience didn't want Lucy ending up with John, it wasn't all rooted in classism and a hatred of poor people, and here's why. The Financial Diet brought this up in their review of the film, but John's lack of appeal as a partner isn't solely rooted in the fact that he doesn't make a lot of money and he isn't successful. I think it's actually rooted in a lack of growth, a lack of maturity, which is what we, the audience, find off-putting about him as a partner. It's not like he's working a job in like a public service. He's attempting to succeed in a creative field, which he clearly holds a lot of pride in, to the point where at the ending of the film, when him and Lucy are hashing it out and working it out, he says that he's going to take commercial stuff to make more money, implying that there were other avenues for him to ease himself and Lucy's financial situation, but he chose sort of the pride and the ego of his creativity over that. And also it's like the apartment that he lives in, it's like dirty. And this the thing is that I know, plenty of people who live in house shares. Nearly all of my friends live in house shares actually, but I also know people who the salaries are famously very low in London, but still they don't live in like dirty apartments. They still live in clean apartments or clean houses. I think that what people didn't like about John was like more of a lack of maturity rather than the fact that he didn't make money. When women discuss and debate broke boy propaganda, although it's worded clunkily, like I will happily admit that, I don't think women take issue with men financially struggling or being working class at all or making less money than them. It's if they're potential romantic partner lacks ambition. I think that's the issue at hand. Lacks ambition, lacks drive, and isn't making the future steps to progress in their lives and progress in their career, especially when so many women are making these steps to progress in their lives and their careers and come from a similar class background. Again, I'm not denying that there isn't classism laced into this conversation, or that there aren't plenty of people out there who perpetuate classism and, hatred of poor people via their dating preferences. But I think that painting women who factor in their potential suitors' finances, especially as women, if we have children, more likely we're going to be forced out of the workplace over our partners. We may end up financially dependent on our partners. Painting women with these concerns as classist and shallow feels a little regressive. What Celine's song says about how wealthy people have gotten to our hearts, I think a lot of my issues with Materialists lie in the lack of realism. I feel like even the examples that Song uses as women who are materialistic, who care about men's finances, I feel like she uses an example which, although it is real, it's definitely on the more extreme end of things. Not only does the character of Lucy not feel like a real person, but the character of Harry doesn't feel like a real person either. He's from a wealthy family. He lives in a $12 million penthouse in New York. He's built even more wealth from private equity. Harry, just being a nice and well-intentioned guy, just isn't realistic. Most, if not all, people who acquire that amount of wealth do have some skeletons in the closet. Even if there was a part of the film where, and again, I'm not saying that Harry needs to be painted as a one-dimensional villain, but even if there was a part of the film where they discuss politics and Lucy finds out that Harry's a Republican, because that'd be the most realistic depiction of someone that wealthy, is that they're a Republican, that would have given us something. If it would have been a realistic depiction of the upper classes, and it would have made us root for John more. But alas, the film doesn't go there at all, and I feel like this film really did lack true capitalist critique. I feel like that would have been a true capitalist critique, as sort of painting the wealthy for what they actually are. Again, I'm not saying that Harry needs to be a horrible person. I'm not saying that he has to be one-dimensional. There can still be those moments of sensitivity and closeness between them, but it would have been a really interesting conversation discussing politics. And I actually think one of the most complicated parts of politics is the fact that sometimes someone's political parties that people vote for, you sometimes are really surprised because it doesn't seem to match with the person that they are, although obviously you are your politics. And also, Materialist doesn't present or portray any drawbacks of dating someone who's significantly more wealthy than you, the classism that you might be at the brunt at from their friends and family, their internalized classism, dating when there's a large financial disparity, the power imbalance within the relationship. It doesn't address any of that. To conclude, to wrap this video up, I've been loving doing the conclusions after, like watching the whole video through, what my thoughts are like. It's been like a week since I filmed. To conclude, I do think that although Materialists was a victim of poor marketing, the fact that it was marketed as a rom-com, even though it's nothing of the sort, even if it was marketed correctly, I still think the biggest crime that this film commits is that it's so boring. It was so boring. I felt like it wasn't saying anything. I felt like it wasn't committing to any sort of genre. The messaging was so blurry, which in turn made the assault subplot messaging really blurry, which I think can be really harmful or potentially be quite harmful. But also I think what kills me about this film, which I've said many times in this video, so I won't harp on in this conclusion for too long, but what really kills me about this film was the complete potential that this film had and the fact that it was totally lacking. I think that finances within romantic relationships is such an interesting topic to pick apart and unfold and discuss, and it just didn't commit to anything. And I think another reason that this film failed was the fact that there was not any sort of realism within the film. Harry didn't feel like a real person. Dakota Johnson's character didn't feel like a real person. The only person that sort of felt like a real person was Zoe Winter's character and also John. But even John, like, he didn't have the charm to really carry off that role. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you want me to do more reviews, all that good stuff. Sorry, I'm so tired because I literally just ate a massive tub of olives for breakfast. But yes, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you soon for another video.